The great hall of Blackwell Keep was shaking with noise. You could feel it through the stone floors, through the walls, through the cold air that hung in every corridor above the celebration. Wolves who had spent 3 weeks afraid were no longer afraid. They were loud about it. They were laughing, pressing cups into each other's hands, pulling each other into those wide, relieved embraces that only come after surviving something together. Aveline Ashbourne was not in that hall. She had spent the afternoon the way she always spent the aftermath of fighting, sitting with the ones who had not made it out whole. She had closed wounds. She had drawn fever from 2 young warriors who were burning from the inside. She had sat beside a girl named Zirel Nightwell, barely 18 years old, hands trembling in her lap, her jaw set hard because she was too proud to let herself cry. Aveline had stayed. She had said nothing. She had simply remained beside her until the trembling slowed and then stopped. And then Zirel had exhaled the long, shaking breath of someone who had finally allowed themselves to come down from whatever terrible height they had been holding. That was the work, not the grand moments, the long, quiet, deliberate ones. When the last person left the healing chamber, Aveline sat alone in the silence. She was tired, not the hollow, empty kind of tired, but the specific tiredness of someone who had given genuine attention for hours and was simply running low. She looked at her hands. Then her eyes moved to her work table, to the small bundle of woven cord sitting beside her lamp. She had spent 4 evenings on it. 4 evenings of careful or precise work, pulling the silver and dark threads together in the pattern her mother had taught her, the one that eased inflammation and settled the nervous system of a wolf who had taken a wound. She hadn't made it because anyone asked. She hadn't made it because it was expected. She had made it because Lucian Blackwell had taken a deep cut on the first day of the border fighting, and she wanted, freely, without obligation, for him to be comfortable. That distinction mattered to her. It always had. She picked it up. She carried it into the corridor. The hallway was dim, lit only by the orange glow bleeding out from under the great hall door at the far end. She could hear the voices inside, full, warm, celebrating. She walked toward them. She was 3 steps from the door when she heard his voice. She stopped, or she would always be able to identify Lucian's voice in a room full of sound. In 6 weeks, she had learned every register it had, the precise, controlled tone he used in council, the stripped-down efficiency with his senior warriors, the quieter, unhurried quality it took on in the early mornings when he walked beside her and said nothing in particular, and somehow it was enough. She knew his voice, the way you know the weight of something you have been carrying for a long time. This version was different. It had no management in it, no awareness that anyone outside could hear. She's just a deal. Her father needed protection. I needed her gift. She makes it easy by believing in it. Let her. A beat of silence. Then Zayden Valorhart's voice, breezy and warm. She seems like someone who genuinely thinks what she feels is returned. Lucian said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was not a question. Laughter followed, light, casual, the laughter of men discussing something that did not matter, something that had already been handled. Aveline stood in the dark corridor. She did not move. She let every word finish landing. She felt the pain come, not as heat, not as anger, but as cold. The slow, settling kind. The kind that fills every hollow space completely, taking its time. She looked down at the healing charm in her hands. 4 evenings of herself, pressed into every thread, every careful hour of it. She knelt. She placed it on the stone floor, gently, without a sound. She straightened her spine. She walked away. She did not run. She did not knock on the door and confront anyone. She simply walked away, her steps quiet on the stone. And in that single, noiseless gesture, every open, freely given piece of herself that she had been pouring into this place for 6 weeks closed, quietly, completely, like a door. The story rewinds 6 weeks. We are going to watch everything now, knowing exactly how it ends. There is a valley in the south where the air smells of river clay and night-blooming starweed, and where the wolves who live there are not powerful in the way that makes other wolves afraid of them. They are powerful in a quieter way, in the way that healers are powerful, in the way that people who understand suffering become powerful through the understanding of it. Ashbourne Vale sat at the southern border, where 3 territories touched without argument, because no one who lived in Ashbourne Vale was interested in taking from anyone else. They were interested in growing things, in reading the land, in the specific, careful work of keeping a community whole from the inside out. Aveline Ashbourne had been born into that work. She had not chosen it exactly. It had simply always been part of her. The way her eyes were brown and her hands were steady and her mother's voice lived somewhere behind her sternum even now, even 3 years after Lysera was gone. On the morning the envoy from Blackwell Keep arrived, Aveline was in her mother's garden. The night-blooming starweed was closing for the day, the silver petals folding themselves against the morning light the way they always did, opening in the dark, giving everything they had when no one could see, closing back up with the sun. She had always thought that was the truest thing about starweed. It did not perform its beauty for an audience. It simply bloomed because that was what it was built to do. She understood something about that. Her gift was not something she had ever fully explained to anyone who had not felt it themselves. It was not magic in the loud, obvious sense. It was more like a sense, a second kind of hearing, lower than sound. When a wolf pack was well, when the invisible ties between its members were strong and warm and moving freely, she felt it as a hum in her chest, gentle as a slow fire. When those ties were fraying, when wolves were pulling away from each other, when mated pairs were going cold, when young ones were losing their footing and their sense of belonging, she felt it as a thin, high pull somewhere behind her ribs, like a wire drawn too tight. She had been feeling it her whole life. In every pack she had ever visited, she read the health of its bonds the way others read weather, in her body, before her mind caught up. She was tending the last of the starweed when she heard her father's footsteps on the garden path. Elder Caspian Ashbourne moved through the world the way deep water moved, without announcing itself, without rushing. He was silver-haired and deliberate, and he always had her tea ready before she came in from the garden. He knew her specific silence when she was thinking hard about something. He had been watching her for 23 years, and he never missed anything. He stood at the garden gate. She looked up at his face and knew immediately that something had arrived. "There's an envoy at the door," he said. "What, from Blackwell Keep?" She set down her tools and went inside. The envoy was a young warrior named Caven Redthorn, tall, formal, clearly uncomfortable being anywhere near healers, which Aveline found quietly amusing. He delivered his message with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed it. Blackwell Keep had been experiencing a bond sickness for 2 full seasons. Invisible damage spreading through the pack's internal ties, warriors growing cold toward one another, mated pairs drifting without understanding why, young wolves losing their grounding, their sense of where they belonged. Alpha King Lucian Blackwell was requesting the presence of Ashbourne Vale's most gifted healer. In exchange, military protection at the southern border, full trade passage, and formal alliance with the most powerful pack in the eastern reaches. But after the envoy left, Aveline found her father standing at the window, jaw tight, hands loose at his sides. It was the posture of a man carrying grief he was not going to put down. "You've already decided," she said. "The veil needs this protection," he said. "I will not pretend otherwise." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll go." Her companion, Novara Winterborn, was already packing by the time Aveline climbed the stairs. Novira was sharp-eyed and practical, the kind of loyal that took itself seriously enough not to perform it. She said nothing when Aveline entered. She simply held out a folded travelling cloak and met her eyes. On Aveline's last night in the valley, she sat alone in her mother's garden for a long time after dark. The starweed opened around her in the dark, pale and silver, while she was honest with herself, which was something she had learned from her mother, this insistence on honesty when no one else was watching. She had seen Lucian Blackwell once before. 2 seasons ago, at a large interterritory gathering, a crowd of several hundred, noise and fire and formal ceremony. She had not expected to remember him. She remembered the way he moved through a crowded room, not pushing, not performing authority. Simply going, the way water goes, as though the space ahead of him understood it was being asked to make room. She had watched him for longer than she intended. She had told herself it meant nothing. She allowed herself one night of possibility, one honest, unguarded night of wondering. At dawn she went inside, pressed her palm to the door of her mother's garden, and rode north. Novira rode beside her, but the landscape changed as the days passed, the soft, river-fed greens of the south giving way to harder ground, darker trees, the particular quality of light that comes with colder air and higher elevation. On the morning of the 3rd day, Blackwell Keep rose out of the landscape ahead of them. Dark stone, cold light, a place that had been built to hold something, to keep weather and war and everything else out or in. It made no allowances for softness. It did not try to appear welcoming. Aveline looked at it for a long moment. Then she lifted her chin, straightened in her saddle, and rode through the gates. She had expected ceremony. She had prepared for it. The formal alpha chair, the full ceremonial colors, the performance of power that she had witnessed from every territory lord she had ever encountered. They all did it, as they all understood that the first meeting set the terms of everything that followed, and they used it accordingly. Lucian Blackwell was standing at the central fire in the courtyard, plain clothes, arms loose at his sides, no chair, no elevated platform, no ceremonial anything. Just a man standing at a fire in the late afternoon, watching her arrive. She could not tell, in that first moment, whether the informality was deliberate, a calculated choice to appear approachable, or whether he simply had not felt the occasion required dressing up for her. She filed both possibilities and kept riding. His handshake was the old way. Palm up, fingers open, the ancient gesture that meant, "I am not holding anything against you." His dark eyes held hers for exactly 1 beat past what formality required. Then he stepped back and introduced his inner circle. Zayden Weilerhart, his second, warm and easy, Lorcan Nightwell, quieter, watching everything, and the senior healers who would work alongside her. She told herself the extra beat of eye contact meant nothing. The weeks that followed were not what she had expected. She had expected to be managed, to be given a task list and a schedule, and a room that was comfortable but clearly defined as her workspace. She had expected to be treated with the specific, impersonal courtesy that important guests received, the kind that kept you at arm's length while appearing gracious. Lucian was not warm. He did not scatter compliments. He did not reach for softness the way some alphas did, using it as a tool to keep people close and willing. He was direct, controlled, and precise in every session she observed. But he was present in a way that defied simple explanation. He appeared beside her in the mornings without being asked. Not every morning, but often enough that she began to notice when he didn't. He rode with her on territory surveys, listened when she described what she felt in the bond lines, and did not half listen the way busy people half listened. He followed. He asked questions that indicated he had retained everything she said the day before. He had the rare quality of attention that made the person receiving it feel, genuinely and without flattery, as though what they were saying was worth following. Novira noticed. She always noticed. One evening, braiding Avelin's hair with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times, she spoke without being asked. "He is careful with you, but careful is not the same as open. I have not yet seen a man who is undone by you." Avelin was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know, I'm still watching." She was always watching. The starweed thread arrived on the 3rd day of her 2nd week. She had mentioned, once, in passing, during a territory survey, that she had nearly run out of the specific silver thread she used in her healing work. The southern climate grew it easily. The northern air was too dry. It was a small practical concern, nothing more, something she mentioned without expectation. 3 days later, a neat bundle of it appeared on her work table. No note, no ceremony, just the thread, placed precisely where she would find it. She picked it up. She stood holding it for a long time. She turned it over in her hands. She thought about what it meant that he had listened, not just heard, but retained and acted on something she had said once, without emphasis, in the middle of a conversation about something else, entirely. She told herself it was management, good management, the kind that kept a useful resource comfortable and willing. She almost believed it. The training yard at night was empty by the time she found herself sitting on the low stone wall, 3 weeks in. She had started going there in the evenings when the work was finished, the open air, the particular quality of quiet that came after a long day of intense focus. The stars hung lower here than at home, brighter. She did not hear him approach. She only realized he was there when his shadow fell across the ground beside her. He had dismissed his lieutenants, and he crossed the yard without announcement and stood beside her, without ceremony. They looked at the same sky for a long time without speaking. Then his hand moved. Without comment, without making anything of it, he reached across and tucked a loose strand of her hair back behind her ear. His hand was warm at her temple. It lingered for a breath, not long enough to be a declaration, just long enough to be deliberate. Then he was looking at the sky again. She replayed that moment many times. The full moon bond ceremony came at the end of week 4. Ancient words under an open sky, the whole pack gathered in a wide circle. The ceremony that renewed the invisible ties between every member of the pack and formally included her in the record of this territory's healers. When Lucian placed the bond mark on her wrist, a single line of heat tracing the old pattern, his thumb rested over the mark for 3 seconds, past what the ceremony required. She noticed. She held it carefully, the way you hold something you are not yet ready to name. In her room that night, she found a formal note on the pillow, written in his hand, signed with his full name and title, as though she might not know who he was. She read it twice. Something in the formality of it pulled at her, something complicated. She folded it carefully. She thought, he is a king. He carries more hours than anyone outside him can see. I will be patient. I will give this real time. She believed it completely. The border held on a Tuesday. Aveline was not there when it happened. Her place was not at the border. Her place was here, in the keep, yet preparing the healing chambers, pulling her gift into focus the way you pull a bowstring, steady and precise, ready for the moment it would be needed. The wolves came back in waves over the following 3 days, some walking, some carried. She worked without stopping. The victory celebration was announced for the 6th evening. The great hall was decorated with fire and with the branches of the deep northern pines, and by late afternoon, the keep was already alive with the particular relief of people who had been afraid and were not afraid anymore. Aveline did not go down. She sat with Zerel Nightwell in the small recovery room at the end of the east corridor. Zerel was the youngest of the wolves who had been at the border. Barely 18. She had taken no serious wound. A bruised shoulder, a cut along one cheekbone, or nothing that would leave a mark. But she had seen things out there at the border that she was not yet ready to carry. Her hands were in her lap, trembling. Her jaw was set hard, teeth together, and her eyes were dry and distant. The look of someone who had decided, somewhere deep down, that falling apart was not something she was allowed to do. Aveline sat beside her and said nothing. She simply remained, fully present, without performance, without rushing the girl toward any particular feeling. She let the room be quiet. She let Zerel be exactly where she was. After a long time, the trembling slowed. After a longer time, it stopped. Zerel exhaled, one long, shaking breath, and her shoulders dropped the half-inch they had been holding up for days. She did not look at Aveline. She did not thank her. She simply sat in the new quiet of herself. Aveline stayed until the girl's breathing was steady. Then she gathered her things and walked out. The healing chamber was empty and quiet. She sat down at her work table for a moment, resting her eyes. The lamp threw warm light across the surface, across her tools, across the small bundle of woven cord sitting to the left of the lamp. 4 evenings. Every night after the formal sessions ended, sitting here by this lamp, pulling the silver and dark threads together in the pattern that eased pain and settled a wolf's nervous system. She had not been asked. She had not been told to. She had simply seen that Lucian had taken a cut on the first day of the fighting. Nothing life-threatening, but the kind of wound that pulled and ached and interrupted sleep, and she had wanted him to be comfortable. Or not because it was her job, because she wanted it. That difference mattered to her. It had always mattered to her. She understood that a gift given from genuine care was one thing, a service delivered under obligation was another thing entirely. She had spent her whole life making sure she knew which one she was giving. She picked up the charm. She stood. She carried it into the corridor. The great hall door was at the far end. Light bleeding gold from beneath it, the sound of laughter and celebration, clear even through the heavy wood. She walked toward it. She could hear individual voices now. Xaden, warm and carrying. Someone else she didn't immediately recognize. And then Lucian's, arriving through the wall with its particular low register. She stopped walking. She heard Xaden first, to clear and comfortable. The whole keep has noticed how she looks at you. A pause. Then Lorcan Nightwell, with his easy, private laugh. And then Lucian. Unhurried. Certain. The voice of a man speaking in a room where he has no reason to be careful. She's just a deal. Her father needed protection. I needed her gift. She makes it easy by believing in it. Let her. The pain didn't arrive as heat. It didn't arrive as the sharp, sudden kind, the kind that makes you gasp. It arrived cold. The slow-settling kind that fills every hollow space completely, without rushing. She stood in the dark corridor and let it come. All of it. Every word landing one at a time. She thought about the starweed thread on her work table. She had held it for a long time that day. She had built something out of it. Not something dramatic, just a quiet certainty, or carefully assembled from small things. The thread, the extra 3 seconds at the ceremony, the way his eyes found hers 1 beat past what formality required, every small gesture she had gathered up over 6 weeks and treated as evidence of something real. She watched all of it retranslate in an instant. The thread was not care. It was maintenance. He had noted that his resource was running low and replenished it. The extra 3 seconds. Management. The deliberate, calculated warmth of a man who needed something from her and understood how to keep it. She was not someone he was falling for. She was not someone he was even considering. She was a gift that had arrived in a deal, and she had made it easy for him by believing he meant the small kindnesses he offered. She looked down at the charm in her hands. 4 evenings of herself. Or she knelt. She set it on the stone floor, gently, carefully, without a sound. She straightened. She walked away. In her room, behind the locked door, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. The specific quiet of a person, letting grief run all the way down, not shortcutting it, not skipping any part of it. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she let it go all the way through. It took a long time. When it was done, the room was very still. She sat in the silence and felt the particular clarity that only comes after grief has finished. Not numbness, but something clean and cool in the place where the grief had been. Not anger. Anger was hot and spent itself on the wrong things. This was different. This was the specific feeling of a woman who had understood the full shape of what had been done to her, and decided, without performance, but without anyone watching, that she would not accept it. She crossed the room to her work table. She paused. Then she walked to the bed, knelt beside it, and pulled out the rosewood box she had kept there for 3 years. The key was on a cord around her neck. She had worn it every day for 3 years, waiting for the moment her mother had promised would come. Open it when you most need it. Not before. She put the key in the lock. She turned it. She opened the lid. 3 things inside. A letter in her mother's handwriting. A copy of the Interpack sovereignty records, certain sections carefully underlined in faded ink. And a sealed document from Elder Arvella Stonehaven of the Neutral Sovereignty Archive, dated 6 months before Lysera Ashbourne died. Lysera Ashbourne's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, like it was always moving toward something. Aveline had forgotten that. It came back to her immediately, looking at the paper in her hands. That particular, forward-leaning script, the letters precise but never rigid, moving across the page the way her mother had moved through rooms. With intention, with a sense of where she was going. She read the letter slowly. You were born with a gift others will always want to claim. I could not give you a world that would not try. I could only give you the law that says they cannot. Read carefully, then decide what kind of woman you are going to be. She put the letter down. She picked up the sovereignty records. Her mother had read these documents with great care. The underlined sections were precise, not broad highlights, but exact clauses, exact language, or the marks of someone who had understood exactly what they were looking for. Aveline read them 3 times, slowly, completely. The Ashbourne clause was registered and verified with the Neutral Archive, filed 6 months before Lysera died. It stated clearly, in the formal language of interterritory law, that no healer of the Ashbourne bloodline could be compelled, assumed, or claimed through alliance, bond union, or pack custom without their fully willing, written, and witnessed consent. Not assumed. The word sat at the center of everything. Not a dramatic prohibition, just the simple, firm, irrevocable statement that what Aveline gave with her gift could only be given. Never taken, never purchased, never arranged without her knowing. Her mother had known, long before Aveline had understood what her gift would cost her in a world that treated unusual things as resources. Lysera Ashbourne had spent her final months when she was already ill, months when every hour must have been precious and exhausting, quietly, carefully, registering her daughter's protection into the law that no single alpha could override. The vulnerability had always been armored. The box had always been waiting. Aveline sat at her table for a long time in the dark. She thought about her mother's garden. She thought about her father's face at the window, jaw tight, hands loose, the posture of a man carrying grief he would not put down. She thought about Zirel's hands, trembling, going still. She picked up her pen. The next morning, or she dressed in her Ashbourne formal colours for the first time since arriving at Blackwell Keep. Deep silver and midnight blue, the crescent mark of her house at her collar. Not the warm, accommodating tones she had been choosing every morning for 6 weeks. The soft choices. The ones that said, "I am trying to be easy here. I am trying not to take up too much space." She looked at herself in the mirror once. She went downstairs. The morning council session was routine. She listened through the first hour without speaking. She let the usual reports complete. Then she raised her hand and requested the floor. The room gave it to her. "I would like a formal reading of the Interpack sovereignty records," she said. "Specifically, the Ashbourne clause, are registered with the neutral archive." The room shifted, the way rooms shift when something unexpected begins. It was not loud. It was the shift of people who have been moving forward and have just realized the ground ahead is different from what they expected. The records were brought. Elder Arvella Stonehaven, present at Blackwell Keep for the post-conflict Elder Review, a woman whose white hair and straight spine suggested she had been reading documents like this for longer than anyone in the room had been alive, took them. She read the Ashbourne clause aloud, every word, in the unhurried voice of someone who understood that the words mattered. The room was extraordinarily still. Aveline watched Lucian understand it in real time. She watched it move across his face, the precise, careful unpleasantness of discovering that something he had believed was settled wasn't settled. That for 6 weeks he had been operating on an assumption that no law in the wolf world actually supported. That every healing session, every gift of her gift, every open and deliberate offering she had made in this keep had been a choice, her choice, freely made, and not a transaction he could count on continuing. His composure did not fully hold. Something moved through his dark eyes, gone almost as quickly as it arrived. Aveline spoke clearly, without performance. "Every healing session going forward will be logged under my name and credited to my sovereign choice. My full title will appear in all pack records. The wolves of this keep have done nothing wrong, and I will not stop working. But what I give will be given, or not assumed." That evening he came to her chamber, controlled, contained. He knocked. She opened the door. "What are you doing?" he said. His voice was perfectly controlled. Everything else about him was not. She could read the space around a person the way she read bond lines, the invisible, unmistakable tension of someone who had been managing a situation and found that the situation had changed without his permission. "I was giving everything I had because I believed I was loved," she said. "A gift given under a false belief is not a gift. It is a mistake." Something moved across his face, gone before she could name it. He left without another word. She allowed herself 15 seconds with her eyes closed. Then she went back to her work table, opened her logbook, and began entering the healing sessions she had performed that week under her full, formal name. The next morning, the pack moved around her differently. Not with suspicion, not with confusion, with a cautious, genuine respect, the kind that must be earned because it cannot be managed into existence. They had watched her walk into a council session and name herself clearly, and they understood what they were looking at. Aveline Ashbourne, healer of the Ashbourne line, sovereign in her own right. Not a deal, a person. The inter-territory gatherings happened every season at a neutral site, an old grounds in the mid-reaches where no single alpha held authority, and where the law required every pack to come in peace, or not at all. 3 gatherings before the Grand Alpha Council. 3 opportunities for the Eastern, Western, and Northern territories to discuss shared concerns before the full formal assembly. Aveline rode north with Lucian's delegation because, in legal terms, she was still Blackwell Keep's bonded healer, and the arrangement had not been formally ended. She was composed and correct in every formal session. In the evenings, she sat beside Novira, which was her preference, and which Lucian had stopped objecting to. On the 3rd evening of the first gathering, a man crossed the hall toward her, dark-haired, broad across the shoulders, deep green and gold, the formal colors of the western reaches. He moved without the particular tension that most alphas carried in public spaces, the way powerful people often held themselves when they were aware of being watched. He looked like a man who had decided some time ago that he was not interested in performing. His eyes were gold. When they found hers, they held no calculation. He bowed. Genuinely. "Sovereign Healer Ashbourne," he said. "I am Riker Stormridge. I have been hoping to speak with you directly." He did not ask what her gift could do. He did not ask how she had healed Blackwell's bond sickness, or what techniques she used, or how long the effects would hold. The questions other people asked, the questions about output, about product, about what her gift was worth in practical terms. He asked what it felt like to carry it. She was quiet for a moment. No one had ever asked her that. He waited for the full answer. They talked for a long time that evening, and in the days that followed, before and after every formal session, what they met in archive rooms, in quiet corridors, in the small reading chamber near the neutral elders' quarters. What they were doing was invisible to everyone who watched. Most of the gathered wolves saw 2 people in close conversation and drew the natural conclusion. They saw an alpha from the western reaches and a healer from the east, meeting regularly with obvious warmth, clearly finding each other's company worth seeking. What they were actually doing was building a legal document. Riker's healers in the western reaches had been subject to pressure for years. Pressure from other packs, from political alliances, from the assumption that their gifts belonged to the territories that housed them. He had been collecting evidence for 2 seasons. He had elder co-signatures from 9 packs, or he had reviewed the Sovereignty Archive records and found, with great interest, the Ashbourne clause that Aveline's mother had registered. He needed testimony. First-hand, witnessed, legally sound testimony from a healer who had experienced exactly what the Sovereignty Accord was designed to prevent. Aveline had that testimony. Together, clause by clause, they built the Accord. Novira watched Riker from the correct distance and said, one morning while pinning Aveline's formal robe, "He looks at you like a person. Notice the difference." Aveline noticed. She also noticed, quietly, uncomfortably, that she did not feel for Riker what she felt for Lucian. Even now, even after the corridor, whatever she had given to Lucian in 6 weeks had not been fully taken back, and that cost her something she was not yet ready to examine. Lord Lucian's behavior was changing. She could see it happening in real time, which was not satisfying in the way she might have expected. He positioned himself closer to her in formal sessions. He stopped leaving evening receptions the moment his diplomatic obligations were met. He watched her and Riker with the specific, controlled attention of a man who was used to managing every room he entered and had encountered a variable he could not manage. Xaden Veilhart stood beside him one evening and said nothing. He was smart enough to understand there was nothing useful to say. One night, Lucian caught up to her in a corridor. "The Western Alpha finds you remarkably interesting," he said. His voice was even. Every other thing about him was not. "He asks questions and listens to the full answers," she said. "It is new." She walked past him. Behind her she heard a long, slow, exhaled breath, the sound of a man who was beginning to understand what he had lost, not discovering it, beginning. There was more of it still to come. In the archive reading room, on the last evening before the Grand Council, Aveline and Riker sat across from each other with the final document between them. Every signature was present. Every clause was sound. Elder Arvella Stonehaven had reviewed it and added her own certification. The case was complete. "This is the cleanest sovereignty work I have seen in years," Riker said. She did not look up from the page. "My mother trained me to understand what I carry," she said. "I am only applying the lesson later than I should have." She folded the document. She placed it inside her robe. She sat with that for a moment, the particular steadiness of a person who has done a great deal of work and is one step from the moment it was always heading toward. Tomorrow. Everything tomorrow. The Grand Alpha Council was held once every 2 years on ancient neutral grounds at the geographic center of all the territories. A wide, open-roofed chamber of old stone where no alpha sat higher than any other, and the sky was always visible above the central floor. The walls were older than anyone's bloodline. The torches burned low and gold. Every alpha of significance in the eastern, western, and northern reaches was there. Their elders, their senior advisors, the neutral archive representatives, the full, assembled weight of the Wolf World's governance, gathered in one place under an open sky, that Aveline entered with the Blackwell Keep delegation. She wore her Ashbourne formal colours, deep silver and midnight blue, the crescent mark at her collar catching the torchlight. She was composed through the morning sessions, trade agreements, border clarifications, the routine work of governance. During the afternoon recess, she found Riker briefly in the corridor. He said nothing. He simply placed the final document in her hands and held her gaze for a moment, the look of a man who understood the weight of what was about to happen and trusted her completely to carry it. She confirmed the signatures. She folded it. She went back inside. The fourth agenda item was called Sovereign Healer Recognition, submitted by the Western Reaches delegation, co-signed by 9 elder packs, that registered under the full authority of the Neutral Sovereignty Archive. Aveline rose. The hall was quiet immediately. Not the polite quiet of an audience expecting a formality. The specific quiet of a room that has understood something real is about to happen. She spoke without notes. She explained bond sickness, what it was, how it moved, what it cost a pack and every individual wolf within it. She explained it in language that required no specialist knowledge, in words every person in that hall could follow, whether they had ever sat in a healing chamber or not. She explained what a gifted healer carried, not as an abstract concept, not as a resource description, but as the living reality of a living person who carried it every day, in their body, in their choices, in the specific and irreplaceable way that genuine care operated. Or she explained the Ashbourne clause. She explained that she had been brought to Blackwell Keep under an arrangement that assumed her participation rather than requesting it. She explained that the arrangement had been made without her knowledge, that such assumptions were unlawful under existing sovereignty records that had been registered for 3 years without her knowledge, registered by her mother, quietly in her final months, to protect a daughter she would not be able to protect herself. She explained that she had not yet performed the full bond anchor restoration at Blackwell Keep, that the Keep's bonds were mending but not complete, and that the continued health of a pack depended entirely and without exception on the willing gift of its healer. The hall was extraordinarily still. A willing gift cannot be forced. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be arranged without the healer's full and witnessed consent. That is not a new principle. It is a principle that already exists in law and has simply never been formally extended across all territories. This accord does nothing more than make that extension explicit and enforceable. She looked at Lucien. He was looking at her. She had his full attention, not the managed, careful attention of an alpha controlling a room, not the flat certainty of a man who always knew exactly what he had and exactly what it was worth. His dark eyes held something she had never seen in them before, the look of a man who had understood something all the way down to the bottom and found the understanding unbearable. She held his gaze for one clean, level breath. Then she turned back to the assembly. I offer this testimony not as punishment. The wolves of Blackwell Keep have done nothing to deserve their land suffering. They deserve a healer who understands the value of what she gives, and a leader who understands the same. She sat. The vote for the accord was called. It passed without a single dissenting voice. In the brief, weighty quiet that followed, she turned slightly toward Lucien. The distance between them was 10 feet of stone floor and a year's worth of understanding. She said it quietly enough that it landed between them like a private thing in a public room. I came here as a deal. It turns out the deal is the only reason your keep is still standing. I am simply making sure the record says so from now on. She watched it land, for one visible, irretrievable moment, in front of every assembled alpha in the wolf world. Lucien Blackwell did not look like an alpha king. He looked like a man who had counted the true cost of something and arrived at a number he was not prepared for. Riker rose from the Western delegation and spoke for the formal record. My relationship with Sovereign Healer Ashbourne was from first to last a strategic alliance toward the ratification of this accord. I was not pursuing anyone. I was watching her secure the legal foundation to protect her people. I was honored to assist. The hall exhaled. Across the elder section, Aveline found her father's face. Caspian Ashbourne stood among the elder representatives, with his silver hair and the expression of a man whose pride had entirely run out of places to go because it had filled him completely. He was not crying. He was simply standing with everything he felt visible on his face, making no attempt to contain it, because some moments did not require containment. Something passed between them. Wordless. Complete. Aveline looked at him for a long moment. Then she gathered the accord from the floor in front of her, placed it in the archive box Arvella Stonehaven held open for her, and walked toward the doors. She heard steps behind her in the corridor. She stopped. She knew who it was. He stopped when she stopped. A long pause. Aveline, he said. Just her name. No title. No distance built into it. The voice of a man who had run out of prepared answers and was standing in the open with nothing in his hands. She turned and looked at him. He had nothing ready. She could see that. He had never in his life come to a conversation without something ready, and he had nothing now. He simply looked at her with the open, the unprepared face of a person who understood they had no ground to stand on and had come anyway. She said nothing. After a moment, she turned and walked toward the courtyard and the night air and whatever came next. Everyone expected her to go south. The morning after the Grand Council, the common understanding among every delegation present was that Aveline Ashbourne would return to Ashbourne Vale, that the alliance would continue in legal form, the accord required it, but that she herself would observe it from a distance, send reports through her father's house, perhaps designate another healer to complete the restoration work. That was the expected ending, the clean one. She did not take it. 5 days after the council, she rode north, back to Blackwell Keep. Novira rode beside her without comment for an hour. "Oh then, you know what you're doing?" "Yes," Aveline said. "Do you want to explain it?" "The wolves there did nothing wrong," Aveline said. "The work isn't finished, and running would give the story an ending it hasn't earned." Novira considered this. Then she nodded once, with the particular brevity of someone who has decided an answer was sufficient. They rode the rest of the way in the companionable silence of people who understood each other completely. Blackwell Keep had shifted. Not physically. The walls were the same, the gates the same, the smell of northern pine and cold stone the same. But the interior was different. The pack moved around her differently now. Not with the careful, managed courtesy that Lucian's authority had once required them to show her. With the uncertain, a genuine respect of people who had understood something they had not understood before, that what they received from her was a gift, offered by choice, and that gifts given by choice could be withdrawn. They were more careful with themselves around her, quieter, more honest. On the second morning, Novira knocked on her door early. "There's something outside your door," she said. A small clay pot. Inside it, a single cutting of night-blooming starweed, pale silver, petals open toward the morning in the exact shade of the ones that grew in her mother's garden at home. There was no note. There was never a note, she had come to understand. He communicated in gestures the way other people communicated in sentences. Novira stood in the doorway. "He looks at you the way you used to look at him," she said quietly. Aveline held the small pot in both hands and looked at the open petals for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's the hardest part." Lucian made no grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, no formal apologies delivered in public spaces. He appeared in the healing garden each morning, walking the perimeter path, sitting on the low wall, present without requiring anything in return. He sourced old archive volumes on healer lineage that she had been trying to locate for 2 years, leaving them on her work table without ceremony. He cleared a blocked water channel in the garden that she had mentioned, once in passing, weeks before the council. She had not expected him to remember. She noticed. She held these things differently than she had held the things before, not as evidence of something she needed to be true, but simply as what they were. Small, deliberate things. A man trying to learn a different language. One evening they were both in the library. No appointment, no stated reason. Just 2 people in the habit of working late in the same large room. He looked up from his papers. "You used to bring me things," he said. "Small things, without being asked." She did not lift her eyes from her work. "Yes." A long silence. Then, I was wrong. She waited. Not as a strategy. Not because I need something from you. I am telling you in this room with nothing to gain from it. I was wrong about what I had. I was wrong about what you are. He put down everything he was holding and looked at her with no management in his face. No distance. Just the open, the undefended uncertainty of a person who had voluntarily set down every tool and was standing in the open with nothing but what was true. She looked at him for a full, unhurried moment. Then, I know you do. I can see that you do. That is the beginning of something. It is not yet the end of something else. He absorbed that. He did not push against it. I know, he said. She went back to her work. He went back to his. The room was quiet around them, and not unpleasantly so. The bond anchor restoration happened alone. Late at night, in the old foundation chamber beneath the keep, a low stone room as old as the territory itself, where the original bond lines had been laid into the ground by the first wolves who had claimed this land. She came down with her lamp and her tools and her full, unguarded attention. She knelt with her palms flat on the ancient stone. She felt the weight of the place, the 6 weeks she had spent here, the corridor and what she had heard in it, the grief that had run all the way through and left its clean residue behind. She did not rush past any of it. She held it all, completely. Then she gave, not for Lucien, not to satisfy the arrangement, not to prove anything to anyone watching, or to fulfill any obligation she had once believed was love and now understood differently. She gave because she had chosen to, because the wolves of this territory had done nothing wrong, because Zirel Nightwell deserved to have the invisible ties of her pack whole beneath her, because the choice to give was hers and no one in the world could take that from her anymore. The bond lines caught. She felt them hold, deep and sure, or the way roots hold in good soil, the way the best things hold when they are finally where they belong. When she came up through the foundation corridor, she stepped into the small courtyard garden she had never spent much time in. Old stone walls, climbing night flowers she didn't know the name of, a strip of sky showing a quarter moon. Lucien was sitting on the low stone wall, alone, not wearing his authority the way he wore it in halls, just sitting with his hands loose on his knees, looking at the starweed cutting in the corner bed, the one she had placed there herself 3 days ago, because the garden needed it. He looked up when he heard her steps. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, fully, without management, without the careful distance he had spent years building and maintaining, the look of a man who had decided, and somewhere in the last weeks, that keeping himself defended was a lesser thing than being seen. She crossed the garden. She sat beside him on the wall, not close, not touching, the honest distance of two people who haven't yet agreed on what the space between them means. The quiet settled. "The bond lines are moving again," he said. "Yes," she said. Another long silence. The night flowers opened along the wall, white and slow, doing what they did in the dark. "Why?" he asked. One word. But she heard the real question behind it. Not a question about healing technique or bond mechanics. The larger, heavier thing underneath. Why did you come back? Why did you give this, after everything? Why does any of this still exist? She looked at the starweed for a moment. The pale petals, open in the dark. "Because it was time," she said. "Doesn't because the wolves here did nothing wrong." He was quiet. Then, "And us?" 2 words. No decoration. No pretending the question was smaller than it was. She looked up at the quarter moon. "I don't know yet." Honest. Clean. The most truthful thing she had said to him since she had learned the full truth of what she was to him. Not a closing door, not an open one, just the actual, honest state of things, offered without softening it. "That is more than I deserve," he said quietly. She did not tell him he was wrong. She did not tell him he was right. She sat with the truth of both things and let them exist together, without forcing a resolution. The night flowers opened. The starweed held its pale petals up toward nothing in particular, the way it always had. Not for the moon, not for the garden, not for anyone watching, and simply because it was built to bloom. And it did. Aveline sat with her hands in her lap, warm from the healing work, the bond lines humming beneath the stone beneath her feet. She did not know what came next. She did not need to. Whatever came next would come at its own pace, in its own time, when she was ready and not a single moment before. That was the most powerful thing she had ever understood about herself. Not the gift, not the law her mother had left her, not even the moment she had stood in front of every alpha in the wolf world and spoken plainly. This, right here. The simple, unshakable knowledge that she was the one who decided. The tragedy of Lucian Blackwell was not that he had nearly lost his pack. It was that he had nearly lost the woman who would have given him the whole world, and only understood what she was worth the moment she chose to keep herself for herself. And she sat in the dark beside him, sovereign and unhurried, and the night was full of small things that bloomed without being asked.